Welcome to the CNBC-TV18 special. We're coming to you from Davos 2023. I'm Shireen Bhan, and today we are at the coolest place in Davos at the World Economic Forum. We're at the Equality Lounge. Shelley, thank you so much for collaborating with us to give Future Female Forward a platform here at the World Economic Forum in Davos. What makes the female quotient and the Equality Lounge the coolest place to be?
Well, because you're here. You know, I have to say that it has been a remarkable couple of days here, especially because it is the place where the conscious leaders hang out, and all the women are here having conversations about how we're going to change the equation and close the gaps, and having really all of the CEOs here talking about how we are going to gather to really make a difference. When you talk about how it's going to take another 132 years to close the gender gap, it's absolutely ridiculous. So we can actually do it in 5 when we work together. And bringing the Equality Lounge to the G20 in India, it doesn't get better.
It doesn't get better. And thank you so much for collaborating with us to get the Equality Lounge to India. G20, of course, is going to be a big moment for us to be able to showcase what can be done at a global level to address some of these universal challenges. But Shelley, I want to understand from you, you said 132 years. That is how long it will take, according to the World Economic Forum's Gender Gap Report, to bridge the gap. That's awful. That's absolutely awful. But you said we can get it done in 5. Are you hopeful that on the back of the conversations that you're having at this point in time, that we're anywhere closer to minding the gap?
Absolutely. I mean, if you think about leadership inside of the biggest corporations in the world, if CEOs take action and create the will, there's always a way. I mean, when you look at pandemic, we created a vaccine in a year. If you look at Kennedy, he decided to put people on the moon. We did it in 10 years. If you look at self-driving cars that know when lights turn green and red, and there's no people driving them, when you want something to happen, you make it happen. So if you want to close the gender gap, why can't we pay Sally the same as Peter? It's not complicated. Why can't we put women in leadership roles? Why can't we create a new sponsorship model and put diversity as a priority? So we absolutely can get it done. It is not complicated. We have the data.
We have the data, and let me move the conversation forward and come back to you, Shelley, in just a second. But Jajata Shah, this is what I want to address with you. You have decided to take the route of entrepreneurship to try and bridge the gap. You're not just doing this for yourself, you're doing this for women across India. Take us through the story, and more importantly, what the road ahead looks like for you.
So, we all know that women are, we're not even questioning this anymore, so let's be very clear. We all know that women are assets, women are influencers, women are game changers, women are impact creators. And so it was a no-brainer to then work in India, where there is literally over 100 million women that can actually pave the path in an amazing way. And so when I started Frontier Markets, the goal really was to invest in those women, to give them a digital platform, to give them the opportunity to be exactly who they are and help other women and other rural families get access to all these services that they needed, right? Impact ultimately and markets and change really only comes when there's a connector. So today we have 35,000 women entrepreneurs who've helped over 1 million families get access to over 50 million solutions in agri, healthcare, finance, services, etc. Saral Jeevan is what we say in Hindi, easy life. But also they've earned over $30 million of income themselves. Now, why is that so important? Because we've been talking about impact economy in a very large way at the WEF, and we're talking about the role of leadership for the future of the world. And when we look at India, it's super exciting to think about what can be. So what I'm excited about is what we announced today now in partnership with several governments, is that we are leading what we call She Leads Bharat, which ultimately is a movement where 1 million women will now impact 100 million families in Bharat, India, to showcase and be the template for design for the future. Now, these women will not only help 100 million families get access to literally 500 million services, they will unlock $1 billion of capital, and it only takes $10 million of investment, which is game-changing. And at the same time, these women are going to become the leadership roles that we've seen that what G20 is about. And most importantly, we will be the template of the future of change globally.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, big round of applause for that, because it's not easy to do, and especially not the kind of numbers that you're hoping to address. It will unlock value and it will unlock economic potential as well. Venkat, let me address this issue. As Shali said, we can do it if we want to do it. It needs the political will. It requires leadership. It requires courage. At Deloitte, that's what you're attempting to do. You have put targets in place on what you want to achieve in terms of having women in leadership positions, in leadership roles. Culturally, what is it meant within the organization to get to that goal?
I think that the biggest advantage we had was growth. We were in a country that was growing, and we always believed that we would grow some multiple of the growth of the country. And for example, in the last 7 years, Deloitte has added, in real terms, almost 40 or 50,000 people. And therefore, if you look at the first base level, which is really not an issue, is to get the 50% at the entry level. That was easy. The second issue was, how do you speed up promotions within the system? That became harder, and we solved it by saying, solve it for everybody. Make the path to partnership quicker. And we said, instead of 12 years, let's make it 9 years. And we did certain things, collapsed certain levels, did everything else. Have we got now to where we want to get? Well, I'm now told, because I'm going to retire as CEO in March, that my successor is going to put 4 more women into leadership than I did. So I had 2 out of 13. He's probably looking at 5 or 6 out of 13. Now, whether he gets there or not, kudos to him. But we looked at about 30% of the board and the executive. I think, frankly, if you get to 50%, that's something which has to be done.
Absolutely.
As you said, it's a no-brainer.
It is
because
a no-brainer.
Eventually, decisions just have to be taken, and you just have to move on.
Yeah, Shali, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, it's conscious leadership. It's choice.
It is a strategic choice to be made. It is absolutely a strategic choice to be made. And Susan, that's what I want you to comment on. Venkat gave us an example of how organizations are looking at policies, human resource policies, incentive policies, compensation, and so on and so forth, to try and bridge the gap, to try and retain women, to try and bring down attrition, to try and encourage more women in the leadership positions. What's holding organizations back at this point in time? What are some of the key barriers that need to be addressed?
That's the $64 million question, isn't it? Well, I think, as Shelley said, partly it's will. People at the top. Often these things are led directly from the top, actually. And if you have someone in leadership who's willing to make a decision to change things, they change. So I think that's one thing. But I also think that we all hold, like a Trojan horse, inside us, we all hold these kind of invisible norms and attitudes and ideas that we don't even know exist, actually, a lot of the time, until someone challenges us, like saying, I'm going to make 50% women. So you can get a big backlash against that. So I think that, and I think that's often underrated, actually. There's sort of the resistance that individuals feel about this, and you really have to tackle that. And then, of course, people being willing to kind of get in there and do it and change the systems, it requires work and effort, and also skill and compassion too, actually. So, yeah, I think with gender equality, there's no one single thing that can change it. You need all these different aspects working together.
Absolutely, and there is no one-size-fits-all solution either. It has to be relevant and contextual to the company, the organization, or the country that you are dealing with. Paramayer, welcome to the program. We are here talking about what the G20 can mean in terms of India's efforts to try and bridge the gap, especially on gender. We've seen data that doesn't look good at this point in time, and we need to do better, a lot better on that front. What should we expect from the government, since you have decided to make women-led development a priority, a strategic priority for India as it takes on the G20 presidency?
Now, as you said, Shireen, women-led empowerment is one of the 6 major priorities in the G20. And I think India, over the last 7 or 8 years, has really shown leadership and empowerment of women. Take big programs like the Swachh Bharat Mission, the Clean India campaign, which primarily benefited women and girls who had to defecate in the open but now have toilets to use. But women in that program went from being beneficiaries to leaders from the lowest level. So we had schoolgirls in Bihar saying, "Mujhe shauchalay chahiye." They demanded a toilet,
Yeah.
and they got it. Then we had women in Jharkhand who went from being beneficiaries to Rani Mistris. Raj Mistri is a mason, so they got economic empowerment. But beyond that, at different levels, it was the ASHA workers, the Anganwadi workers who came out and mobilized and triggered that behavior change. District collectors, some of our best champion young collectors were women. Now, the other thing is, as you know, in the panchayats, 40% of women are, 40% of the members are women.
Yeah.
So that's going on as well. And now, if you look at the IAS as well, our civil service, when I joined the IAS way back, in my batch, as we call it, I think there were only 12 or 13% women officers. Today, it's more like 25, 30%. So I think at leadership levels, at all levels, increasingly women are assuming leadership roles. In my own organization, in Niti, my sort of second in command, as they say in the army, is a fantastic lady officer called Radha, an additional secretary. So I think you're seeing increasing sort of empowerment and leadership of women in the government as well. In the political class, the leader of our delegation here is the Minister for Women and Child Development.
Yes.
Again, so therefore, I think you're seeing it. Obviously, it's a major topic. More needs to be done, as the Prime Minister mentioned in his speech at the Red Fort. You know, the whole approach needs to change, and I think that's an important agenda of the government.
Where do you believe the gaps really lie today? What can be the role of technology to try and bridge some of those and amplify the work that's being done?
So I'll put this in two directions. So let me answer the second part first, because I actually think, you know, I have become a big fan of the government, by the way, just to be clear, because we're partnering in a really amazing way. So, yeah. But also that there is a common alignment right now, which is really important. There's a gender convergence. And there's a digital equality, or I think openness that's happened right now, which I think is amazing. In fact, I think India is one of the first countries that is saying they're going to be digitally transparent in a digital first economy in a way that's kind of brilliant. Okay, it's not been done before. And so what does that mean for rural women, however? So as India becomes more and more digitally transformed, the challenge here is that women are still not getting access to those smartphones. They're not getting the internet connectivity. And there's efforts to digitally train them, but they're not getting digital businesses. So if we don't bridge that gap, that's going to be a big problem. Now, today, I have a really cool tech platform that helps women get jobs and earn income. But I can only select those women that have smartphones. So why am I only creating 1 million women entrepreneurs? Is because the 100 million don't have those phones. And that's a problem in my mind. That's first on the digital transformation. Second piece in my mind is also around then, like the transparency of data and digitization of data. So the more data that we bring into the spectrum, there's a lot of challenges, right? Data security, data ownership. Also, how does one read that data?
Yeah.
So on a woman entrepreneur, now comes to my side, I'm a very feminist woman entrepreneur. So when I look at data, I see it very differently than, unfortunately, my counterparts do. When I see a data point of 300,000 women still asking that their aspiration is to get a toilet in their own home, a Sarkari government guy goes, see, Swachh Bharat. I look at this and I say, why can't I just sell that to Kohler and tell them that they'll pay $100 and you now have a $300 million opportunity, but make it happen fast. Because this is where markets and I think business comes in with a different lens. So somewhere we're trying to understand where that nexus is. How can we look at a femme first, consumer first, digital experience where we have to start trusting each other to build and bridge that gap that could be exponentially amazing because women are at the center of it.
You know, that's a very important point that you make, and I want to get Susan, Venkat, and Mr. Iyer to comment on that. This convergence that Ajayta spoke of, it's not just public-private partnership. I mean, that has existed. It's worked successfully, not so successfully in many areas. But this way of looking at these challenges as market opportunities and then involving the private sector, making it economically viable and lucrative for them to look at this as an opportunity. Are we engaging in that conversation? Is that conversation happening at this point in time? Paramayer, let me start by asking you.
No, I think it really is. If you look at Jan Dhan, there are 400 million bank accounts. Most of them are women. They were totally unbanked. So, that was a very, very powerful step taken where women have their own bank accounts in their name. So I think that was an important step. Then if you look at the MSME sector, increasingly now, there is a program encouraging women entrepreneurs, women startups. Niti has a women entrepreneurship platform. So I think the environment, the enabling environment is there. Obviously, much more needs to be done, but bringing in the market, as you mentioned. Now, a Kohler toilet might be a little above anyone's pay grade.
That was like a funny example. I would rather it be like a local Indian brand. Let's be very clear.
Yeah.
But I'm just.
But the Rani Mistris of Jharkhand and other places, I'm sure they can make toilets which are cost-effective and as good as Kohler toilets. So I think, again, now what's really happening on the ground, there is an enabling environment, but obviously it's also an attitudinal change.
Yes.
And, that needs to be brought about. And clearly, from the Red Fort, the Prime Minister, that was one of his opening statements. Attitudes need to change, and all of us need to play our little part in that.
Mm-hmm. Susan, let's address that. Attitudinal change, of course, is a significant part of being able to address this challenge, and especially when you have an environment of patriarchy that continues to exist across different aspects of our lives. But as Mr. Iyer pointed out, there are enabling drivers that have been created. It is a much more enabling environment from a policy perspective. What more do you believe needs to be done on a policy perspective? More importantly, what do you think hasn't worked so far that we need to redress and change?
Well, I think, as you've said, and also you've said also that, India, there are so many amazing things happening at the moment, I think, and the convergence between sort of policy and interest of the private sector is enormous. So I think that, again, this issue of change, I think partly that happens when people partner with each other and they learn from each other that they can trust each other. And actually a really good example of that is we have a set of principles called the Women's Empowerment Principles that the private sector sign up to, and that includes, women in leadership, the policies around empowerment, employment, and women in the supply chain, also opening up supply chains for women's businesses. And actually engaging with businesses, there are so many private sector companies that are wanting help to change. They recognise the business case without a doubt that diversity improves the bottom line and lives for everyone. And so it's not even, there are plenty of people to work with now who want to change, I think. So it is about finding where the energy is and being able to capitalise on that and provide support as needed. And that's partly what UN Women does, actually. And on that, just things like the private sector, I'm not Indian, and I've only been in India for 2 years. I was really bowled away by the fact that there's, a requirement in CSR funds, for example, to give money to women in the community, and that happens at massive scale across the country. So all of these things, I think, will add up to amplify the change that's already occurring. And I think that is occurring at the very top with the Prime Minister from the ramparts of the Red Fort saying, women must lead this change. And that's being wound through the G20 as well. And I think that's quite groundbreaking, actually, for any G20 conversations.
Yeah, Shelley?
Well, I just wanted to really close on something very important because we are going to be ending the Equality Lounge here in Davos, and it was just really important to have this conversation, really leading from here at the World Economic Forum, leading to the G20, which is why I wanted to call it the road to G20. You can see how important this conversation is and why putting women, when you add women to any equation, there's a return on equality. It is so important to continue this conversation. There's a lot to talk about on the road to the G20, why we are bringing the Equality Lounge to India for the G20. We've never done it before. It is so incredibly important. We want to thank CNBC. We want to thank you for having this conversation.
Thank you very much, Shelley. It's an absolute pleasure to be here.